Greetings everyone, it's Jeremy Sutton here from PrecisionPrinciple.com, coming to you once again from Makloganj, India on day 9 of the intensive Ashtanga Yoga training. Now, we have at this point completed the intensive philosophy study. Soon we'll go on to anatomy and some other things. We're still in the middle of our methodology course. But having completed the main components of the philosophy of yoga, I thought it might be appropriate to sort of look back, ask some questions about that, and see if we can't come to some reasonable answers. So, in particular, a quick recap. The yoga philosophy is based in the theoretical side of Samkhya. And even though yoga is considered atheistic, it's considered non-religious, it's considered a sort of secular type of philosophy, it is considered spiritual in nature. The question of what is spirit is, I suppose, up for debate. But here's one reason that it's considered spiritual. And real quick, even though it's secular, it's surely not without some forms of dogma, in the sense that there are some ideas that sort of underlie the philosophy, and you just have to kind of take them on faith. So a big question is, if you don't take those ideas on faith, is the philosophy of yoga still effective? Is it still useful? Is it still, can it help us in any meaningful way? So in particular, one of the basic premise is that humans are in a situation of suffering. Our suffering is caused by ignorance, and our ignorant actions cause us to accumulate, through karma, cause us to accumulate samskara. The samskara leads to karma, leads to samskara, leads to karma, and this is sort of the mechanism that keeps us in the cycle of birth and death, so it's said. So for example, because I can accumulate samskara right before my death, and it's also believed that all samskara has to, cosmic justice of karma means that it must come back around. If I accumulate samskara right before death, then I have to be reborn so I can have a chance to be pure of this samskara. So that's a tall drink there that to take in. Do we have to believe that life is an endless cycle of birth and death for yoga to be worth our time? Because essentially the idea is that to escape this cycle we need to reach enlightenment. So yoga is the process by which we reach moksha, by the process by which we reach enlightenment. So it has been said that yoga is a disciplined process with a logical conclusion. The process we'll talk about later, but the conclusion is enlightenment. And so, do we have to accept all this for it to be useful? And essentially, I'm going to argue today that no, we don't need to have faith, dogmatic belief in these, in that, the rebirth and re-death is an actual thing in order to reach, receive benefits from this practice. And here's why. Whether or not this cycle of birth and death is real or not, something we will never be able to prove with certainty. No one will, no matter how certain anybody ever is, will never be able to say yes or no. We can prove without any doubt that this is a real thing. So, what are we moving to? What are we doing then? For example, let's for argument's basis, let's say that birth and re-death is not a real thing. Well, then what's the point of yoga? Well, the end goal is still enlightenment. So this brings up a new question: is enlightenment a thing? And if it is a thing, what would it be? Well, the philosophy and the philosophy and the ideas in the yogic tradition are pretty clear about what enlightenment is. It is essentially self-realization. And there are many traditions and many people who have written about this so-called self-realization. The Dalai Lama is one of them. He's written just dozens and dozens of books on the topic, and we can look through a number of other traditions and see similar ideas, including modern scientific psychology. Because the principal illusion that we're really talking about is this illusion of self, this feeling of I, the feeling that I am an ego, that I am this body, that I am Jeremy, that I am right here. This feeling of I am and this identification with this body is said to be the principal illusion that we're all suffering from. So, a lot of people agree. For example, in brain science now, we used to think, can we find the center of consciousness? Can we find that seed in the brain, the center where consciousness, the sense of self resides? Is there a ghost in the machine, so to speak? And though we keep looking through a number of different ways to look at this, and we're coming to the conclusion that no, there doesn't seem to be a single part of the brain that's responsible for our sense of self. That is, that our sense of self doesn't have a specific spot in the brain, but rather all of the functions of the brain coming together when we kind of have a sense of their wholeness, and that sense is our sense of self. Sam Harris has a very interesting point in his book Waking Up about these experiments. For example, people who experience epilepsy, part of this is caused by a sort of tennis match of electrical currents flowing back and forth from one side of the brain to the other. So a little bit grotesque, but one solution for this problem for people with severe epilepsy is that to basically split the brain into two separate halves. That is, in the middle of the brain there is a thick chunk of nerves called the corpus callosum, and that is responsible for the majority of information moving from one side of the brain to the other. And in split brain patients, what's happening is, to cure their epilepsy, people with an actual knife, they sever this connection. They split the brain right in half. So essentially there's a very limited communication between both hemispheres of the brain. Now, through a number of ingenious experiments, you see, they figure out how to give information to one side of the brain, but not to the other side of the brain. In particular, the eyes, the one side of the eye goes to this side of the brain, right? So the right side of the eyes, of each eye, sends information to the left brain, and the left side of the eyes send information to the right side of the brain. So, if you show somebody a picture over here while they're looking straight, the picture only comes up to this side of the brain, this side of the eyes. So it only goes to this side of the brain. All right. Similarly, the left brain controls the right hand, and the right brain controls the left hand. So, language is also kept primarily to one side. I think it's the left side of the brain that's responsible for language, but it doesn't really matter. The point is that one side is responsible for language. Now what they do is they will flash an image to the eyes so it can communicate to the side of the brain that's not responsible for talking. That is, the talking part of the brain did not see the image. So the researchers will ask the patient, "What did you see?" And they'll say, "I don't know. I didn't see. I don't know what I saw. I didn't really see anything." But then they will have them reach through a curtain, so to speak, and there'll be maybe 20 items, and they'll ask them to feel around with one hand until they find the correct item, right? So let's say the item was an egg. So they'll reach through the curtain and they'll start to reach around until they grab this egg. Now, they'll say, "Oh, I think this is the item." They'll pull it up and say, "This is the item." Well, is what's looking like the side of the brain that could control that hand knew the answer, but that side of the brain didn't have the ability to speak. So the part of the person that could speak said, "No, I don't know anything." So seemingly, there's at least, for example, in this instance, when the brain can't communicate, there's two centers of consciousness at least, because the one side noticed the item, and the people will basically get the correct answer in a rate that's far beyond random chance. They'll do it time and time again, and they'll be able to pick the correct item just all the time. But they won't be able to explain why. In the book, Sam Harris says, the item would be an egg, and they'll say, "Oh, why did you choose the egg?" And again, now you're doing the talking part of the brain. The part that talks doesn't really know the reason why they picked it. And they'll say, "Oh, well, I had eggs for breakfast, so I guess that's why I chose it." But no, the real answer is that we just flashed a picture of the egg to that side of your brain, and the side of your brain that controls that hand knew what the correct answer was. So when it had a way to answer through the feeling, you had a chance to answer. And it did, it answered correctly. So, the point is this, that if we have a side of the self, the brain that can talk, and it didn't have communication with the part of the brain that saw the egg in the answer, then we can sort of see how we don't have a homogeneous sense of self, how when the corpus callosum is not severed and the two sides can communicate, they communicate so quickly that it easily the information is passed from one side to the other. So if you see it only on one side of the eyes, that information gets passed to both sides. So you can say, yes, I saw an egg. But when this is split, we can see how that the consciousness, the awareness of each side of the brain, and maybe even each part of the brain, is really independent of each other. And the point is that this sense of self, this homogeneous sense of self, is basically an illusion, or is most likely an illusion. It's not the way that we feel. This goes against how we experience life on a day-to-day basis. It doesn't feel like this is the case, but that is because, as back to the yogic tradition, that is the basic ignorance. And that ultimately is arguing that there's a greater truth behind that ignorance. And Buddhism agrees, Zen basically agrees, yoga here agrees, and now we're getting brain science also, and psychology seemingly converge on this point that this self is an illusion. So, yoga is again the process to self-realization. It's a process, it's not the only one, it's a process by which people can reach a state of self-realization. So, doesn't matter if birth and re-death is a real thing or not. Ultimately, no, because the goal of yoga, this enlightenment, this state of self-realization, it does seem to be an actual thing, right? And furthermore, let's go beyond that. Okay, even if enlightenment, let's just for argument's sake, let's say that it's not a thing, that that's just something that's made up, that it's not a real, we can imagine such a state of consciousness, a state of enlightenment, a state of freedom, a state of identification with all things, but that's just, we just made that up. Humans just made that up. It's not actually a thing. Okay, well still yoga has a number of positive qualities that can help us in a very practical matter, because this process of yoga is designed to help us cultivate awareness, cultivate mindfulness, cultivate discipline, strength of the body and mind. It's supposed to, one of the two meanings of yoga are to yoke, to connect, to join, and the second one is to concentrate, right? So to join is the sense that if we join our mental faculties, our mind, and our body, in this present moment, we connect those three things, boom, 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 then we have sort of this alignment that's going to help us be healthier, happier people. I mean, that's easy to see. If we're really got a split personality, a split mind all the time, then of course we're not going to be as happy. And concentration is another key skill for anything that we're trying to do in this life. So really, the essence of yoga, whether or not the sort of assumptions from which the philosophy has grown, whether or not those assumptions are true or not, the practical benefits for yoga are still definitely there. I mean, and all you have to do is look at the well-being of people who have really been dedicatedly practicing a full yoga practice. And what I mean by that is not simply doing the asanas. The asanas are the physical body postures, but people who are actually cultivating awareness through the 8 branches, cultivating awareness of their environment and their social community, treating people with respect and doing things that promote well-being both for yourself and for others in that environment. Having a positive relationship to oneself, good attitude, contentment, generally not being attached to the things around us. Surrendering our ego, as in not being so contracted and being so self-centered, but rather being open to things that are greater than ourselves and actually doing things for the purpose of something that we consider to be more important than ourselves, something that's greater than us. Then cultivating the 3rd branch, cultivating the body, cultivating our energy, using our breath to actively bring our state of consciousness, our state of awareness, either up in energy to match the situation that we're in, or maybe down in energy to match the situation that we're in. Then there's the 5th one, where this turning in of the senses, where we start to reflect. I mean, this here, it kind of marks the border of the 2 fundamental aspects of reality. The whole physical universe that's out there, things that I can touch, things that I can feel. With my hand, I can pick up, I can measure it, I can weigh it, I can add it, I can subtract it. And then, on the inside of this divide, we have things that are less tangible, things like my mind, things like love and trust and awareness, generally speaking. So these are subjective qualities. We have on the first four about the external qualities, we have the turning in, and now we have the internal qualities. And these two things make up the major divisions of everything. And then, we get to the internal meditative qualities. The sixth is a single pointed focus. The seventh is a duration of concentration, where we start to completely lose ourselves in the thing, where we're so completely focused and we have no distractions on the outside. We start to enter into a flow state. And then ultimately, in this flow state, when we get so concentrated and everything calms down around us and we're so completely immersed with what we're doing, that we actually lose our sense of self for some period of time, right? These qualities are all basically positive. And they're practical. They have a practical benefit. I mean, if you are functioning on this level, you're almost guaranteed to be a healthy person who's contributing to the well-being of yourself and others, and who is, just living a content, happy, fulfilled life, whether or not there is multiple lives, or there are multiple lives, or whether or not there, is a heaven or is a hell, or whatever it is. This is just good practical advice to help anybody. So, in a nutshell, that's kind of my personal thoughts on the recap of yoga over the last few days. Because a lot of times people argue, well, I don't believe that there's rebirth, and I don't believe that there is enlightenment. So it doesn't matter, and I think it doesn't really matter, because these practices still have benefits. And I think it's the Latin translation for which society is the Society in Britain for the Sciences, but I wish I could remember what it's, classical part, of which Isaac Newton was a part. It says, "See for yourself, come and see for yourself." And the point is, and the Buddha, by the way, said that same thing. He said, don't trust anything I have to say. He said, instead, don't trust anything unless you experience it as real for yourself. And same thing goes for anybody else. So the point is, just come and see for yourself if you're interested in this tradition. And even if you're not interested in practicing yoga in some sort of full-on experience, why not cultivate these aspects of awareness, of mindfulness, of contentness, of energy, of meditation and focus, and ultimately of losing yourself in something that you consider to be greater than yourself, something that's more important to you than your ego, more important than your own sense of self. And if you don't have something like that yet, don't fret. We're all going through life at our own pace, and it takes time to figure out what you're really going to care about, or if or what you do care about, or if you already know what you care about, how can you best realize that care? How can you actually make something from your energy? How can you actually contribute to the world? Because ultimately, we're all consuming almost nonstop. We're consuming food, water, air, resources, television, books, internet sites, videos, movies, whatever it is. We're all this stuff all the time. We're just taking it in. And if all we're doing is taking things in, but we're not producing anything back out there, we're not putting anything, we're not making anything, we're not either producing or creating, then basically our life is consuming the earth away. Because all we're doing is taking, but we're not giving anything back. And if that is the case, if we are only consuming and are not producing anything of value for anybody else, then basically our lives are a burden on the existence of the earth. It's a burden on the generations that will come ahead of us. And so it's a pretty significant, existential question. Do I want to be a burden on all of existence? Do I want to be a burden on this planet? Or do I want to contribute something to the planet as well? And even those of us who want to contribute, we have a tall order ahead of us to actually make something of this, because we consume a lot. If you were driving in cars, we're consuming oil that's been in the ground for millions of years. If we're eating food and meat and vegetables, or drinking water, we're consuming a lot of resources just to keep ourselves alive. So we all have to make the decision about what life is about for us. And the yogic philosophy, whether or not someone follows it or not, it's a certain lens that we can look through to become more aware of a lot of the different parts of life. And these parts of life are basically common to all of us. So in that sense, whether or not rebirth and death, re-death, or the cycle of samsara is a real thing, whether or not enlightenment, as in I'm going to get to a state where I'm ultimately free of suffering for all eternity until I pass away, and then leave this cycle of samsara, whether or not any of that is true, this lens provides us with tools to improve our lives, to improve our well-being, and to contribute to the well-being of people around us. So that's all for today. If you've been enjoying these videos, go ahead and subscribe down below. You'll make sure you get all the updates and the future series that we'll be producing here. But in the meantime, go ahead and check out precisionprinciple.com. If you're looking for a tool to bring yourself into the present, I would highly recommend joining the game. If your game hasn't started yet, it's time, my friends. If you don't know what the game is, go check it out. In the meantime, keep learning, keep growing, and have a great day.